I thought I'd start with this photo. Good evening, everybody, first of all, and thank you for being willing to put up with my ramblings this evening. I've started with, I think, the classic Stainmore photograph, which is of a train of empty wagons coming back over Belar Viaduct, which of course sadly is no longer there. It's taken by a northeast photographer by the name of Jack Armstrong in the late 1950s, and it really is a splendid photograph. I think it's one of the best ones of Deepdale Belar that I've ever seen. So in 3 days' time, Saturday, it'll be the 200th anniversary of the opening of the Stockton Darlington, but yeah, everybody thinks, well, this was a railway from, Witton Park, Colliery, down through Shildon to Darlington and on to Stockton, which indeed it was. But by the end of the existence of the S&D, it was quite a wide-ranging system and operated the actual trains operating as far as Furness and West Cumberland. But really, when the celebrations in 1875, 1925, 1975, really no attention was paid to the fact that the S&D was much more than Stockton to Darlington. And in 2023, Mike Thompson and a couple of his pals at Kirkby Stephen successfully applied for National Lottery Heritage money to help tell this story, which it's quite remarkable that they got it, but indeed they did. And there you can see some of there's the book, a couple of the company seals, which we'll talk about in a minute. And part of the funding was for a traveling photo exhibition. Part of it was for restoring a locomotive and a Northeastern Railway stores van and all kinds of other stuff. But part of it also you get heritage lottery money. You got to tick a lot of boxes. One of them is educating the public. And this was one way that they felt that educating the public would be seen to be being done, was by having a traveling photograph exhibition, which would be at numerous places in the area of the Stainmore Railway, mainly in that area, going over towards Darlington and Stockton and up to Penrith and across to Cockermouth. And we're trying to tell the story of two railways, the South Durham and Lancashire Union Railway, a lovely Victorian railway name, and the Eden Valley Railway. And these were both essentially wholly owned subsidiaries of the Stockton and Darlington. They had the same shareholders, and the S&D put the money up. The S&D were quite cute, they were Quaker businessmen, and I rather get the impression that this might have been done just in case there were any financial problems, that it wouldn't affect the S&D directly. They were built in the late 1850s and early 1860s, and they linked County Durham in the east through Barnard Castle over the Stainmore Pass and down to Tebay and Penrith in the west. The engineer was a well-known gentleman, sadly well-known for another reason. It was Thomas Bouch. They subsequently designed the first Tay Bridge. And Thomas Bouch was known as an engineer who provided, I'm not joking, he provided quality engineering work and constructed his railways at a reasonable cost. And he had already engineered the Darlington and Barnard Castle Railway, and it was a sort of a natural shoe-in to get him to engineer these two lines in the mid to late 1850s. Now, where is all this? Well, I'm going to blow this up because this is a drawing that I found in a newspaper many years ago, and it's supposed to represent a Londoner's view of Britain. And you can see down in the bottom there's the Metropolitan Police area, which extends from Brighton to Potters Bar. There's the M1, which goes to Birmingham, and as we know, of course, it doesn't. and then that's the end of road. Well, the end of the M1. Then there's the end of railways at Manchester, and then going further beyond that, then we get to, well, the Arctic Circle, and beyond there somehow there's Scotland and Yorkshire, and of course we're looking at the Yorkshire and County Durham part of that, but they don't feature on this map at all, so nobody really knows quite where we are. I'm going to try and correct this a little bit. This is hopefully a map that you may recognize slightly better. This is a proper map of Britain. You're down here in the London area, and where we're going to be looking at tonight is up here over Stainmore, which is to the east, County Durham, and to the west, Cumberland and Westmoreland. Now, if we zoom in a little bit on that, you can see that the top map is again that area blown up a little bit, and the enlargement shows in green the course of the South Durham and Lancashire Union, which is, if I can just get my laser pointer going. Laser pointer, there we are. That's the South Durham and Lancashire Union, going right over there to Tebay, and the Eden Valley ran from Kirkby Stephen down the Eden Valley, hardly surprisingly, to just short of Penrith. And there's it a little bit closer. Again, you can see Bishop Auckland here, the line coming across, relatively undulating but not particularly mountainous country. And then the real mountain section is here between Bowes and Kirkby Stephen, and then down the Eden Valley is very lush and very pretty flat, and then a little bit of hill climbing over the hills to Tebay on the London and North Western Railway main line. Now, why did they want to go to these two locations? Well, there were connecting lines that were planned for, first of all, to get across from Penrith to the iron ore mines and steel plants in Workington and in Cumbria. And this was a railway called the Cockermouth and Keswick and Penrith, which the Stockton and Darlington had a shareholding in, but did not own. And then these other routes here from Tebay was down a little bit of the West Coast main line as far as a place called Hincaster Junction. And then there was a cord across to the Furness Railway, which then took us down past Grange-over-Sands and Ulverston to a place called Lindell Ore Sidings, just short of Barrow, which again was to access the steelworks and hematite mines in Furness and in Barrow. So this is another map that I actually only came across the other day, and in retrospect, I would have used this, but it's maybe for next time. You can see it's an absolutely delightful map. It's a northeastern map that's trying to show you, if I zoom in a little bit, trying to show you that all the different sorts of wonderful natural resources that the northeastern had on all its routes. And so all these little squares are have different color codes to show you just what sort of wonderful freight on opportunities there were on the railway. But anyway, let's move on. There'll be more maps as we move forward, so you can see where things are. But let's go now to what's basically an avalanche of logos, and these were all the sort of committee of the willing who were going to help with the exhibition. And you can see there, if I can just turn off the laser pointer again, I think I'll do that for the moment. So you can see there was this Locomotive Conservation and Learning Trust, which is a bit of a mouthful. They're the people who are restoring the J21 060 Northeastern locomotive. These engines were particularly associated with Stainmore, and more by luck than anything else, one locomotive survived, and it's being restored. The Cumbrian Railways Association, which does what it says on the tin, they're interested in all the railways in the Cumbrian areas, so it includes the Northeastern, but obviously the Furness, the Maryport and Carlisle, the London and North Western, and so on. Ourselves, Northeastern Railway Association, the Armstrong Railway Photographic Trust, which is a trust that acquired all the negatives of this chap Jack Armstrong, who took that photograph of Beelar that we saw right at the start. The Stainmore Railway Company, which is the operating company for the station at Kirkby Stephen East. And finally, I'm obliged at all times to show that we've got money from the Heritage Lottery Fund as well. So there is their logo. And of all the logos on that page, there are clear specifications from the Heritage Fund as to how large it must be and where it must appear and all the rest of it. So I hope I haven't got into trouble with that. So what did we do? Well, we had lots of phone calls, Zoom meetings, people put selections of photos together, and finally it was time to actually get together, and we finally went to Kirkby Stephen East. And we met the project manager there, who's sitting in the center of the photograph, and his assistant behind. And I'm obviously joking a little bit there. Barras the cat. There is a station called Barras on the Stainmore line, and this is the Kirkby Stephen East station cat, who is quite a character, and he's called Barras. And sitting behind him is Mike Thompson of the Stainmore Railway, and I think it's not an exaggeration to say that were it not for Mike and his wife driving this thing forward, then I don't think there would have been anything at Kirkby Stephen, neither a heritage railway nor this exhibition nor anything else. They really have put in a lot of effort, and if you ever get up there, the results are quite splendid. They've done a super job. So it was time then to do lots of printing and mounting photographs and trying to fit them on display boards and putting together a nice sort of poster to hang up outside the various exhibition halls. And after a lot of work, it was all ready, and Easter weekend was approaching this year, and it was time to hit the road and actually set the exhibition up in Appleby. And you can see Mike there heading off down the platform at Kirkby Stephen with a trolley with all the exhibition boards on. That van that you can just about make out on the right in the sort of maroon colour is Northeastern Railway Stores van number 2, which they have also restored and is absolutely splendid. It really is. It was a wreck. It was at Beamish for some time, and they got it to Kirkby Stephen, and they've done a superb restoration job. So we set it up in Appleby. You can see in the middle photograph there, we had to slightly reconfigure some of the boards because there were rather low beams in the very old Tourist Information Bureau, and we got our sign up outside, and things have moved forward from then. At the moment, it's in, I think, Darlington. If anybody's interested, I can send you a larger copy of the blurb, because you can still see it. It's going to be around until middle of January next year, I think. But as you will have seen most of the photographs, you perhaps don't need a trip up there. So let's have a look at the pictures. We decided that although it wasn't strictly South Durham and Lancashire Union, we ought to include Darlington to Barnard Castle. And there's Darlington, and you can see the railway running to the left, westwards to Barnard Castle. This was built first, and this was one that also was engineered by Thomas Bouch. And that starts at a place in Darlington called Hopetown Junction. And this is Hopetown on a snowy day, and the signals are actually cleared for the line straight ahead up to Shildon. The original Stockton-Darlington 1825 route up to Shildon, but the line moving off to the left over to the west is the start of the Darlington and Barnard Castle. And here's a rather nice shot of a loaded train departing from Darlington, coming up past it's past Hopetown Junction, and that building in the right distance is it's about the only thing that's left there now. That is what's known as the 1861 shed, which is now part of the Hopetown Darlington sort of museum complex and is used by Northeastern Loco Preservation Group and by the Darlington Railway Preservation people. And it really is an 1861 straight loco shed, and again, quite a remarkable survivor, really. So we're moving west. Next stop is a place called Pierce Bridge, the village of Pierce Bridge. You can see on the map there, I hope, the River Tees is just south of the station, and the result is that the village of Pierce Bridge is in Yorkshire, but the station was in County Durham. And this is a rather nice shot at Pierce Bridge in 1898 or thereabouts, when they just finished a new signal cabin. And we can see everybody standing outside very proudly. We think that these are probably members of the signalling gang. They're too well dressed for plate layers, and we rather suspect that this was taken when they had literally just finished the signal box. And again, if I do a bit of a blow up here, then you might be able to see that on the footboard outside the window there is not only a signalman leaning nonchalantly against the window, but he's brought the dog as well. And really quite an interesting shot. The station master is sort of above the level crossing gate in the distance, a chap with a very interesting beard. And behind the box is an old tender. Again, not really sure why that was there. It's certainly not attached to a loco, so perhaps it was for a water supply. So let's carry on moving west. We come next to a place called Gainford, still in County Durham, and there wasn't a whole lot at Gainford, just a little station house and a platform, and I think a small goods shed. This is really a rather nice photo of the staff at Gainford. We think the station master there is probably a chap called Richard Humphrey, who had not long been there. Again, sadly, we don't know the dog's name, but for a tiny country station, it just shows you how many staff there were. No wonder that when passenger numbers started to decline, then it was a real struggle to keep these places open. So next stop, a little bit further on, is called Winston. And Winston, we have another quite nice photo of Winston here. This is taken in the 1890s. And the station master is the gentleman in the foreground on the left, who we think is George Kent, who retired in a couple of years later at age 75. Again, a couple of interesting features here. Let me just again roll them up a little bit. The signal cabin has a very typical roof, what's called a scissors truss in the gable there. Very typical of what was called the Darlington section buildings, because the Stockton and Darlington merged with the Northeastern in 1863, but was managed separately for a further 10 years. And they really had very much their own style of doing things, including architecture. And this is quite typical of the sort of signal cabins that were built in that period. The other interesting thing, I think, is that the vehicle there outside the goods shed is, of course, a horse box. And again, really quite an interesting shot. Let's move on. Now, this station that I'm about to show you, this isn't shown on the map, and that's for a very good reason. It was a private station called Broomy Law. And this was for the Bowes-Lyon family who lived nearby. And of course, we know Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was the Queen Mother. So quite a connection with that area, built as a private station. in 1942, during the war, there were quite a number of military camps established in the area, and it was therefore opened to the public from then. And once again, station master in the middle under the lamp with his frock coat. We think it's probably a chap called Robert Calvert. Apparently, John Bowes was so proud of his private station. In those days, you obviously had, all kinds of things that you could afford. And he had a racehorse, and he called his racehorse Broomielaw because of his great pride in his little private station. Now, let's start with the South Durham and Lancashire Union proper. When we were putting the exhibition together, it occurred to us that most visitors under the, if indeed we have any visitors under the age of about 35, probably would have no idea what coke was. Well, I actually asked my partner's son here, who is, it works for British Transport Police, and he's in their drug squad. And I said, do you know what coke is? And I said, I'll give you a clue. It's not the white stuff. And so the only thing he could think of was Coca-Cola. And so we decided that we needed a photograph showing the manufacture of coke from coal. And this is a super picture that we came across. It's in the Beamish Museum collection. It's not actually on the, it's called Auckland Park Colliery, but it's not actually at Bishop Auckland, it's at Shildon. And you can see there a rake of basically coal tubs. And can you see right at the back, there's a little narrow gauge engine pushing them. And they are going to be discharged into those, what are called beehive coke ovens, which are basically a batch process where you fill it with coke, brick it up in the foreground in those arches. You can see one that's bricked up on the right there, next to the chap standing. And they were then fired, and in the early coke ovens, the vapors from roasting the coal just escaped into the atmosphere. So you can imagine what sort of pollution there was around coke ovens. Once the combustion had stopped and the coal had been turned to coke, then they knocked down the refractory brickwork in the doorway there, raked the coke out manually, quenched it with a hose or with with a water spray, and loaded it into wagons. And South Durham coke was very valuable because, first of all, the coal had a low volatile content, so you got a high coke yield. And secondly, the metallurgy of the coke was such that it was relatively low metal, so it was particularly favoured for steel making. So where are we? We are at Bishop Auckland. We've started Bishop Auckland, come round the corner to a place called West Auckland. Another intriguing Stockton and Darlington station design. I rather think this started with one platform and then they added another. But the S&D did things its own way, and you can see that the platforms are back to back. They're not facing one another as you might expect, and of course they're there well, there's a footbridge which you would have needed anyway, but both facing the same way. We move a little bit further on. This is the true start of the South Durham and Lancashire Union, because that bit from Bishop Auckland as far as where we're going now is part of the original Haggerleases branch of the Stockton and Darlington. Can you see there it goes, the black line goes to Butterknowle. That's the Haggerleases branch, and the South Durham and Lancashire Union actually diverged from there at a place called Spring Gardens Junction. And here we can see the SDLUR in sort of going off to the left centre of the picture, and the original 1830 Haggerleases branch is the one on the left, which is dropping down. And you can see that the South Durham and Lancashire Union is already starting to climb up there. And indeed, coming down that gradient at 2 o'clock one morning in September 1892, two Kirkby Stephen engines lost control of their empty coke train. and it finally derailed on track points approaching Spring Gardens Junction. As you can see, a lot of smashed up coke wagons, lettered for Carnforth Iron Works, rather interestingly. And I think even more interestingly is that the newspaper said that the gang had the line cleared by mid-afternoon so that passenger trains could pass. You can imagine today that would be scene of the crime, and it would probably take about a week before the line reopened if everything went according to plan, but they had it running again the same afternoon. There's another photograph taken the other way with the engine in the foreground, but I think this one actually shows the wreckage a bit more clearly and the broken coke wagons. So you remember the Hagalises branch had diverged at Spring Gardens, and it actually stayed down a lower level and went under the new line at a place called the Lands Viaduct. And here we see the Hagalises branch at the low level and the new Lands Viaduct going over the top. A Bouch design, originally not planned to have brick piers like that, but they had to increase the size of the piers because of the potential for some mining subsidence. The girders were later replaced. Those are the originals in that photograph, but they were, well, this was built as a single line, and when they doubled it, then they decided to strengthen the girders and put new ones in. So we're still heading more or less west, and our next port of call is a place called Cockfield Fell. And at Cockfield there was a colliery called New Copley Colliery, and a large coke oven. And the coke oven chimneys are the ones that you can see on the left there, sort of in the haze in the distance. New Copley Coke was also this was one of the suppliers where coke went from here over to Furness and Cumberland. So our next stop is a little bit more scenic, a rather nice looking viaduct. It's a place called Langley Dale. It's still standing, although the line closed in early 1962. And a very attractive stone viaduct and still standing, but very difficult to get. Well, there is no public access nearby, and so unless you fly your drone up or something like that, then you can just catch a glimpse of it from the road. This is one of these photos by Jack Armstrong, and Jack must have hiked across the farmers' fields to get this shot of a Bishop Auckland to no, I beg your pardon, it's a Barnard Castle to Bishop Auckland train going across the bridge. Now, part of this line remained single right until the end. Several sections were doubled, but one section remained single. And it ran from a place called Forthburn to a crossing just outside Barnard Castle called Cole Road Crossing. And here we see a double-headed freight train passing Cole Road, and he's just collected the tablet for the single line section up to Forthburn. It's an evening train. The sun's coming from the west there. And I've just, as an inset, put in a photo of one of the tablets there, and the original caption, as Chris will tell you as he's seen the book, actually explains to exhibition visitors just what that is and why you need one. Right, well, I haven't shown this next bit on the map because we've been looking at a map and we've seen where Barnard Castle was. It's just down the road here from Cole Road. And here we see Barnard Castle on a lovely winter's day. We don't seem to have lovely winter's days anymore, but that was one. Quite a large yard over to the right of centre because, of course, this was a freight route. Passengers were dealt with, but freight was king. There was a loco shed at Barnard Castle, which is at this side of the crossing off to the right. A single passenger platform with an overall roof, and as I said, quite large yards. One interesting thing here is that the Northeastern remeasured the system in 1904, and if you look at the level crossing gate on the right there, you see almost at ground level on the right is what is in basically the top of a Northeastern Railway milepost. It's milepost 15 from Hopetown. And when they measured it, milepost 15 came slap bang in the middle of the road. Well, instead of moving the milepost, they fastened it to the level crossing gate. So that really is only in the correct position when the gates are closed across the road. Sadly, all of this has vanished. It's now the car park for the Glaxo works at Barnard Castle. So this is the way to go to school. Look at this. We've got 4 schoolboys heading off to Bishop Auckland Grammar School, and they're going on the train in the early morning. It's a sort of a wet morning. I think it was in May in the early 50s. And they're talking to the engine driver, and what a smashing way to go to school on one of those. You can see there the overall roof a little bit better, and the rather, I think, sort of futuristic almost design of the gable, where the building itself only goes about 2/3 of the way across, but the rest of the roof is extended to form an awning over that part of the building. And in the background on the right, you can see a couple of goods wagons again in the freight yard. Now, if we go to the other end of the station, once again, you can see there the various freight wagons on the left in the sidings. This is a Penrith train which has come in from Darlington, double-headed, but the engine on the front is about to uncouple. In fact, he may have uncoupled already, and he's going to run forward, run round the train and couple on the back as a banker. This is because the 2 bridges that we're going to see, Deepdale Viaduct and Beela Viaduct, the civil engineer was quite unhappy about the thought of 2 locomotives coupled running close together, running next to one another, and the weight on the spans of the 2 bridges. There are very strict instructions as to what to do if the Darlington breakdown train had to be brought out over the 2 viaducts, and they had to have, I can't remember how many reach wagons between the locomotive and the crane, and they weren't supposed to go over at more than 5 miles an hour and all sorts of stuff. Anyhow, this is getting ready to leave for Penrith. And first of all, we're going to head out west over the River Tees. And there's a superb bridge over the Tees, another Bouch design, similar in concept, but with truss girders. But you can see there are stone piers here. Built by a local contractor, and these are new girders that were put in the early 1900s after the old ones more or less become life expired. Sadly, none of that remains. After the line closed, the branch up to Middleton Teesdale, which closed a couple of years after the Stainmore route, the entire thing was demolished, the girders were removed, and the piers were felled. And apart from the abutments, you would not know today that had ever been there. Just slightly to the west of the Tees Viaduct is Tees Valley Junction, and the Stainmore line is going straight ahead in the centre of the picture, the double line, and the DMU is coming off the Middleton and Teesdale branch. He's just handing in the tablet to the signalman. And the Middleton branch, originally called the Tees Valley Railway, was a separate company that basically had running rights over the northeast and over that bridge into Barnard Castle, but was very soon, well, from the start, it was operated by the Northeastern and very soon bought out by them. And in fact, curiously, the Middleton branch lasted longer than the Stainmore route. And you can see Tees Valley Junction signal box there at on the left-hand side, leaning ever so slightly backwards, built on the bank side and I think gently subsiding. Again, there's a walkway there now, but there's absolutely nothing left. Well, in fact, there's very little left to see along this section. Next stop at a very small village actually called Lartington, and for a very small village, a very large station. You can see this is the station building at Lartington. It's largely intact. It's a private house now. Very considerable building, waiting room on the platform there. What you can't see behind the bank on the left, there was a stable block, a large goods shed, coal cells. And I think the reason for all this, for such a small village, was because this was regarded as the railhead for the Tees Valley before the Tees Valley Railway was built. And of course, within about 15 years of the opening of Lartington here, then the Tees Valley Railway had made this more or less redundant as a railhead. So you still had this huge station building. In the well, before the First World War, I think there were something like 11 passenger journeys a day booked from Lartington. By the late 20s, early 30s, this had dropped to 3. And the receipts from ticket sales and freight were much less than the cost of running the station. But curiously, it stayed open right until the end of the Stainmore line. Now we're climbing up here at about somewhere around 1 in 70, and the line is now curved down to the south. And the next thing we come to is the very deep ravine of the Deepdale Beck. This is a fascinating picture taken during construction in 1858, and you can see how they did it. Basically, they started off from the north abutment with a crane and built the first pier, put the span on, moved out and built the second pier and built their way across. And right in the foreground, you can see the foundations, and the first layer of cross girders has been put in place. I think it's quite remarkable that if you think those were the legs are made of castings, flange castings, and that they all fit it together like a Meccano set. Now, that sounds fine, but you imagine having to lay that out on the floor of the valley and get the height of the foundations correct so that you get a level run of girders across the top. Really quite quite a considerable achievement. And to give you an idea of the scale, right at the top is a chap standing on the end of the span. So you can see how tall it was. It's I can't remember the exact height, but it's well over 100 feet. Again, after the line closed, it was demolished and the abutments remain, but that's all, unfortunately. So heading on, now that you'll see that the line is starting to curve round to head west again, and just beyond where it curves round there was a limestone quarry, which was originally owned privately by Auden Madison, but was later bought by the Northeastern and used as a source of track ballast. And the quarry, in fact, is still open today, although of course it's not rail served, but it's still in use as a source of roadstone. And here we can see a loaded coke train from southwest Durham coming up the bank, and there's 3 engines on it, double-headed, and 1 pushing at the back. And another Jack Armstrong photo, very dramatic. It's just a pity that there isn't a sound recording. Little timber signal cabin that was added later when the North Eastern bought the quarry in about 1910. And in the foreground, in front of the box, you can see the 20-mile post from Hopetown, Darlington. And just beyond Hewlands is, or was, Bowes. Again, a fairly small village, really, with a sort of miniature version of the Lartington station. You see quite a few features are similar. We've got a freight train coming downhill now, dropping down from the summit, heading eastwards, with a J21 class loco. This is in, I think, 1947. He's got a couple of sheeted wagons, which are probably contain limestone, and behind it is a string of empties, probably having hauled coke over the other way. And in Bowes, just beyond Bowes, as we head west, we pass the 1,000-foot contour, and we start we've been climbing all the way from Tees Valley Junction through Bowes, and we're now getting out into what really is fairly desolate moorland. Very much the same today. The A66 road goes over there, and that's over to the left in this photograph. And apart from the fact that the rails have gone and there are no trains and no telegraph poles and so on, that's pretty much the same as you would see it today. It's really quite a desolate part of the world. This is a place called Spittal. Spittal cottages are still there down near the railway. There was a signal box here, but it was a fairly early closure. So we're about halfway, a little bit more than halfway towards the summit. And this is where Stainmore Summit is itself, just over the county boundary. And there's Stainmore signal cabin with an express passenger train coming back, probably a holiday train from Blackpool, and two engines, one at the back, which you can just about make out. And if you look to the left of the rear banking engine, you can just make out the arch of an overbridge down the line, and that might give you some idea of the gradient dropping down from the summit, because it really is falling away quite quickly at about 1 in 60 on the west side, and it just about leveled out at the summit here, and then beyond the summit started to drop down towards Darlington at the other side. Very exposed location, of course. Often a problem with snow. You can see in the foreground here, the point rodding and signal wires are all boxed in to hopefully keep them free of snow in the winter weather. It's still quite a wild location. And in 2011, when the 150th anniversary of the opening of the line, then the Kirkby Stephen East people organised a replica summit sign. Now, the originals still exist. One is at the National Railway Museum in York, and one is at the Hopetown Museum in Darlington. And they didn't want to part with either of those, so they had a replica made. And you can see a group of friends there gathered at the summit, where more or less where the original sign was. And the gentleman in the middle, some of you might recognize him. That's Steve Davies, who was at that time head of the National Railway Museum, and he brought along one of their signal box name boards for Stainmore. And rather a nice gathering. They all went there in a vintage double-decker bus, apparently. Now, I don't really need to explain to you guys what's happening here. The guard, as you can see, in about about the fourth wagon along, the end of the fourth wagon along, the guard is checking and setting the brakes of this loaded coke train before they head off downhill. The banking engine, which you can see in the right distance, has already uncoupled, is setting back, and is going to run round and couple onto the front of the train to provide extra braking power at the front. And they're about to set off down the hill towards Kirkby Stephen, down the 1 in 60. And if you notice, this is a British Railway standard locomotive. Basically, the traffic over Stainmore at this time was such that the most modern steam locos on British Railways, the most modern freight locos, were assigned to West Auckland and Kirkby Stephen sheds for working this traffic, which was a big money spinner and earned the railway a lot of money. But it was not to last very long, because it wasn't too long before the steel plants in Barrow and Whitehaven, they were basically, I don't think they'd been sufficiently modernized over the years, and they were uncompetitive compared with some of the more modern plants at places like Ravenscraig and Redcar and Scunthorpe. And so the traffic over Stainmore declined very rapidly. And of course, passenger traffic over a line like this, apart from excursion trains in the summer from the northeast over to Blackpool and back, there was, you could see from that previous photograph there, it's a sort of a desolate moorland. Even if the entire population of Lartington had travelled every day by train, then it wouldn't have made enough money to keep the line going. So of course it was a very early closure candidate. So we're about to run down the bank to the west. We're going to pass a place called Bleath Gill. Now, some of you have probably seen, I hope in fact that you've all seen, a splendid British transport film called Snowdrift at Bleath Gill. This is a still from it. It was made in 1955, I think, when the British Transport Film Unit had heard that a train had got stuck on Stainmore. And so they sent a film crew up quickly, and they managed to record some absolutely spectacular scenes of snow clearance. And this is one of them. Those of you who've seen the actual film know that about 2 seconds after this particular still, then all the plate layers and the diggers on the fence there scatter, because of course they're about to get covered in snow as the two engines charge into the drift. And then just round the corner from Bleath Gill here, which by the way is there's a farm called Bleath Gill, which is just above the railway. This is the station at Barras. You remember, this is the name that the cat was given. Now, Barras, when it was opened, was the highest station in England. It was later beaten by Dent on the Settle and Carlisle, but at the time it was the highest in England. And here we see it in the 1890s, after a snowstorm. You can see that they've cleared the platform, but after a while you wonder where they're going to, if it snows anymore, where they're going to put the rest of the snow. And I think this probably is the porter coming along the platform. He's got a very large box, and I wonder if it's actually the plates for the photographer. And down at the far end of the platform, the station master is watching proceedings. The South Durham and Lancashire Union actually thought of building a hotel up here. I'm not quite sure who they expected to stay there, but they soon realised that this probably wasn't the best idea. But the station buildings at Barras are still there, but there's little trace of that. You can just about make out where the platforms were. Now, around the corner from Barras, we come to the picture that we started with, and a rather sad picture on the right, which of course shows the viaduct in course of demolition. And it's I put the little verse there because I thought it was rather ironic, really, and whose curling stream shall ever flow within and underneath this splendid monster bridge. And of course, it wasn't to be, because after 100 years, then it was knocked down, and you can see it quite clearly from the road down at Barras when you look up, and you can see this tremendous gap across the hillside, and the two bridge abutments are still there, but of course there's just a yawning gap in the middle. Sadly, I never either travelled over this or saw it, but it must have been a truly spectacular sight. So let's move on a little bit. We're getting close to Kirkby Stephen. We're still on the 1 in 60 downgrade, which won't stop until Kirkby Stephen Yard. And this is a photograph that shows you in how they did rail replacement services in 1909. Now, the loaded coke train came off the rails fairly close to Kirkby Stephen on the way down the hill, blocked both lines. So they brought the Darlington breakdown crane out, as I mentioned, with extreme caution over the two bridges. But what did they do with the passengers? Well, you can see here, they ran one passenger train up as far as they could on the one side and another one up on the other, and said to the passengers, out you go, and walk past the derailed wagons. And there they all are. You can see there's a couple of gentlemen in straw boaters, and there's somebody carrying what looks like a basket of stuff, maybe a hamper. And the breakdown crew are watching this with some interest. But there's a local newspaper report of the incident, and it says that before a train arrived from Kirkby Stephen, which would be on the left-hand side of the picture there, several of the passengers decided to just walk down the line to Kirkby Stephen. So there was no concern about. Well, you couldn't really have run a replacement bus service for this short section. You'd have had to have taken people off at Bowes, and in those days the road was, well, I doubt whether you would have got a charabanc over the roads, possibly. But rather a nice photo. The coke wagon is owned by a Durham coal owning company called Furness and Love, and the number on the end there where it says number 408, the photographer has written that on the negative. It's not a wagon number, it's just his picture number. Right, it's 9 o'clock. Chris, would you like a physical needs break there for a couple of minutes?
Yes, please. Yes, that would be good. So shall we reconvene at 10 past? Is that fine?
That's great. Yeah, let's do that, and we'll be in Kirkby Stephen then.
Right.
Right, shall we?
Yes, part 2. Please go ahead.
Yeah, right. Off we go. Well, we've come a little bit further down the line from the derailment, but still not quite arrived in Kirkby Stephen yet. And this is Podgill Viaduct. It's now owned, as are several others, by the Northern Viaducts Trust, and it's you can walk over it. You can walk up to it from Kirkby Stephen and walk over it. Really rather spectacular. And you can't see it from this photograph, but it was originally built for single line, and the North Eastern widened it, and they basically built one right next to it. They built one alongside it. And when you're at ground level, you can see where the stonework has been changed. But this, I'm quite fortunate here in that we were able to get a drone photograph of this, because as you can see, it's fairly wooded, and these locations are A, difficult to get to, and B, when you do get there, then it's quite heavily wooded. So apart from a drone, you wouldn't really be able to see that in its true state. But really a very attractive bridge. We'll come to the biggest one, which is at a place called Smardale in a minute or two. So after that long descent from the summit down at 1 in 60, we finally arrived at the east end of Kirkby Stephen Yard. Again, rather like at Barnard Castle, you know, this is a freight railway, and the station is sort of in the middle there in the distance behind the bridge, but all the lines on the left of that, in front of the signal box, those are all the loaded and empty mineral lines. And then there's a fairly substantial goods yard, of course, on the right-hand side there. This whole area is now a caravan park. The bridge in the foreground was removed. It's over the River Eden. And again, we'll see something of that in a moment. So if we move forward now to that bridge that you can see in the distance and keep looking in the same direction, then we would see this. And these are the train shed, if you like, of this really quite substantial station. On the left, loaded coke wagons, which have come over the summit and are getting ready to be taken either to Furness or to Cumbria. And on the right-hand side, you can see, first of all, a couple of rather nice looking northeastern brake vans. And that building there is basically part of the engine shed. It's actually a lean-to building. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. We're standing on the bridge. To get down to the platforms, you either went down some steps, or there was also a lift for goods and you know, bulky items. And originally this tin roof in the foreground wasn't there, so you had curiously, it does actually rain quite a bit in Kirkby Stephen. You know, we are high up in the Pennines. It's about 800 feet. And so at some stage, somebody had the bright idea of building a sort of covered walkway from the road bridge here down to the station buildings themselves. You'll see there's a gentleman standing in more or less sort of midway down the platform, and this is from a very high quality glass negative that's actually owned by the Bowes Museum. It was taken by a local photographer called Elijah Yeomans. And we think that this is the Northeastern Railway police sergeant. There was a sergeant based at Kirkby Stephen, presumably had a couple of constables working for him. And we think that that's who it is. So going down to the other end of the train shed, and you can see by this time, British Railways had removed the roof from the Tebay bound, the westbound platform. Fortunately, they didn't remove the roof from the eastbound platform. And therefore, in the distance, that white object is the lift from the road level. And next to it, of course, is the covered stairway. But by this time, the covered walkway has also been removed. But the reason I've called this winter preparations, you can see the two fairly new, well, I say new, 1910 northeastern snowplows, steel snowplows, which have been parked on the sort of dead end siding there between the two platforms. It looks quite a nice day, and they probably were parked there during the summer, but golly, when it got cold, when it gets cold up at Kirkby Stephen, then you needed the ploughs. And this is on a winter's day. I always feel quite chilly when I look at this photograph. Luckily, they've got a couple of fires going in the station building. You can see the smoke from the chimneys, but it's really pretty cold and miserable. They've cleared the snow and a bit more has fallen. So not the warmest of places. That stone building in the middle, the sort of set of offices and toilet block and everything, is 1860 whatever, 1861 original. the drawings of it are still they are at Kew. They're luckily have survived. The drawings for the other stations like Lartington and Bowes sadly have not. It's all the work of an Edinburgh architect called Hector Orrock. And very sadly, Hector died during the construction of these buildings. So he never lived to see his work actually get built. But they really are quite distinctive, and the lithograph drawings at Kew are absolutely wonderful. So I mentioned the River Eden at Penrith. I beg your pardon, at Kirkby Stephen. At Kirkby Stephen, the Northeastern in 1904 installed a turbo generator with a little bit of a dam on the River Eden, and there's some waterfalls there, and you can see that pipe there that's going from the right of the picture to the little stone building. There was a generator in the building there which provided electricity and charged up a bank of accumulators in the lean-to building next to the engine shed, and as a result, Kirkby Stephen Station had electric light. There was electric light and some electric machine tools in the shed, and it also provided power for the hoist from the platform level up to the road. Sadly, there is absolutely no trace of the building itself anymore, but you can still see some of the steel supports for the water pipe going into the building. If you look up above there, that's the road, which is still there. Both of those bridges are still there. The bridge on the left is over the railway, so that's the level of the railway up there, and the bridge on the right is actually crossing over the river. And the other photograph is inside the junction signal box. And you can see there the Northeastern or Darlington section lever frame with a proud signalman with his beautifully polished signal levers, all sadly removed when the line closed. But the Stainmore Railway people at Kirkby Stephen are aiming to build a replica of it, and I'm sure they will succeed. They've recently completed a replica of a much older signal cabin which was nearby, but more of that later. This is one of my all-time favorite photos taken at Kirkby. It's an H.C. Casserly picture taken in June 1935. And although it's June, you can see it's a kind of typical grey, damp Pennine day. There's some puddles on the ground, and things are looking a bit gloomy for June. 3 J21 locomotives. The one in the middle is probably running around the carriages that you can see behind it. There's one just over to the left, and of course there's one down at the far end of the yard doing some shunting. Now, Kirkby had quite a large engine shed. It was extended. The original shed here is on the right, the two roads there on the right. Once again on the far right, by the way, you can see the tower of the lift of the hoist from road level. But the two-road shed wasn't big enough, and it was doubled in size relatively shortly after the line was opened. And you can see there's a couple of J25 on the left and the J21 on the right, and there's a couple of their sisters peering out from the gloom. So really quite a large shed, employing, I think when it closed, I think there was something like 50 men employed there. So it was a significant employer in the town of Kirkby Stephen. Now, this is a similar view taken in the 1950s, and you can see now there are no more antiquated Northeastern J21s and J25s. These are all modern either LMS or BR standard designs. They've all got tender cabs, which of course was a godsend for working over Stainmore. There's a fairly typical northeastern water crane on the far left, and in the center left you can see the electric hoist for coaling the locomotives. This is a rather interesting one. Now, the Durham Miners Welfare Committee bought a rather large, like a country house near Ulverston in the early 1930s as a convalescent home for their members. And there were special trains every 2 weeks that ran from Durham over Stainmore to Ulverston for miners either going to or coming back from the convalescent home. But once a year, at least, the committee used to go over to inspect the home and have a good look round. And I'm sure have a pleasant weekend at it's called Conishead Priory near Ulverston. Now, today, of course, they would hire a luxury coach, but in 1936, you hired a Sentinel rail car from the S&DR. And here is North Britain returning from Ulverston and approaching Kirkby Stephen, passing the West Signal Box. Now, Sentinel cars really weren't meant for working over Stainmore. They certainly weren't meant for working long distances. They didn't have a toilet, and of course, they didn't really have much coal or water. So they had to make fairly frequent stops on the way, and this undoubtedly was one of them coming up at Kirkby Stephen, where there would be there'd be a break for the gentlemen of the committee and an opportunity to take some water and coal onto the Sentinel car. I'd like to think that there was maybe a crate of beer on the in somewhere in the car as well, but seeing as there were no toilets, maybe that's not the case. But quite an unusual photograph, and taken by a chap called Eddie Foster, whose nephew is a volunteer on the Kirkby Stephen East there, and this is one of his negatives. So we're moving on. First of all, let's take a trip down the line to Tebay, and first stop on the way to Tebay is a little tiny station. I can hardly call it even a village. Smardale. It really is a hamlet, and this is the little station that was built at Smardale, closed very early on in the early 1950s. Few facilities because it was really very close to Kirkby Stephen, so there was a small goods yard. For a time, there was quite a large signal box at Smardale. It is not clear to me at all what the purpose of that was. It was at the end of the platform here near the station name board, but that closed fairly early on. Now, as we pass Smardale, we're going to run underneath the Midland Settle to Carlisle main line, which of course only came later. It was a full 15 years after the South Durham and Lancashire Union opened. And shortly after going under the Midland main line, we come to this marvellous structure, which is the northeastern Smardale viaduct. This is a fairly recent photo, and you can see it's got nice handrails on the bridge and everything. And it was Smardale that really was the driving force behind this group called the Northern Viaducts Trust. Because what happened was that it was, like so many disused railway infrastructure, it was owned by the BRB residuary, and it was starting to show its age. And they said, "Well, we think we're going to demolish it, and it'll cost us about £200,000 to demolish it." And so a group of concerned locals said, "Well, why don't you give us the 200,000 and the bridge and we'll look after it? And to cut a long story short, that's what happened. And so now you can actually walk across Smardale Viaduct. They spent a lot of money on repairing it, but still had some change from the 200,000. However, recently there's been some more stonework problems, which has necessitated a bit more repair work. But it's a lovely part of the world. Kirkby Stephen is over to the right of the bridge, if you like. That's the going down towards the Midland line, and over to the left of the picture, we're climbing up towards the summit at a place called Sandy Bank. There you can see Smardale from a slightly different angle. That's taken from some old lime kilns that were built at the line side. Once again, a loaded coke train heading west, with a J21 on the front and a sister loco at the back, banking. It's an absolutely gorgeous setting. And I just wish that Eddie Foster, who took this photograph, I just wish he'd had such a luxury in those days as a tape recorder to record the sound, because it must have been quite remarkable. You can't hear that sound anymore now, but you can take a walk along there. It's a nature trail, and the Smardale ravine there is a sort of a linear nature reserve. So well worth a visit if you get up there, and take waterproof clothes, as they say, because even the weather can be very changeable. So let's move a little bit further beyond Smardale, and the line climbed up a little bit, nothing like over Stainmore, but there was still a climb out of Kirkby Stephen past Smardale to this place, which is Sandy Bank signal box. And you can see the gradient board on the left there, where it's level and then dropping down the hill, heading west. This is a rather interesting picture because the engine is a Great Northern 440. They were transferred up to the Stainmore line to replace very elderly Northeastern 240s and 440s. For whatever reason, the crews at Kirkby Stephen did not like these engines one little bit. And the first one, which is this one, the first one to arrive was sent back to Darlington with a note unfit for working Tebay traffic. But higher authority in York or Darlington or whatever prevailed and said, well, you're getting them, so make the best of it. The first one arrived in this one in late 1931, and Sandy Bank signal box, which we see here, closed in 1932, so we can date the photograph pretty closely. And you can't see him, but there's a tablet stand just behind the engine, and the fireman will have dropped the tablet off for the single line section. Now, when Sandy Bank closed in 1932, and quite why they had a signal box there again is not really clear, because just down the line there's a place called Ravenstonedale, although I gather the locals don't call it that. It's something like Rivendell. And at Ravenstonedale, they moved the single line to double line connection down there, and of course it was only a mile or so, so it made perfect sense. This is another splendid Casserly photo. The sun's out at the moment. It's that same June in 1935, and you can see a Northeastern Class O, a G5, S&DR G5, is heading towards Kirkby Stephen. He's just making a fairly brisk start out of the platform, and it's an absolutely sort of sylvan scene. The station master at Ravenstonedale had been a keen enthusiast for topiary, in other words, cutting shrubs to make different shapes. And the garden just to the right of the loco there in the background contained all of his works. If you think, although this is 1935, this could almost be a Northeastern photograph. The engine, the carriages, the infrastructure, the wagons, the signal. There's one thing that makes it not a northeastern, but an S&DR photograph, and that's that little black building behind the signal. And that is a rail motor house. And the S&DR northeastern area engineer, a gentleman by the name of John Miller, came up with the idea of increasing productivity of plate layers by providing them with little motorized trolleys. And this, if you like, is the garage for one of these trolleys. And you can see there are two rails coming out so that you can roll the trolley out towards the running lines. They weren't all that heavy, and lift it onto the running lines. And that's what that building is there. So if we move a little bit further west, last station before Tebay is a place called Gazegill. Gazegill, again, you can see there the more or less similar to the other smaller stations, the design, and you can also see at the end of the waiting room the scissors truss that we mentioned at Winston and on the end of the building. Double line here at Gazegill appears to have had two platforms from a very early date, unlike the other small stations that only had one. And finally, we arrive at Tebay, and this is Tebay Yard. Rather a lot of activity there. The train in the middle, which is departing, is probably the South Shields portion of the Blackpool to South Shields and Darlington return, basically holiday express. And behind the signal that's at Clear, you can see there's an LMS Class 5, a Black 5. And he has probably brought that train in from Blackpool. And there's another engine on the left-hand side in the yard. In fact, there's two. There was an engine shed at Tebay, which we'll see at the minute. It had gone by this stage, but the yard was there. That other engine is probably waiting to take out the Darlington portion of that train, because it ran as a single train from Blackpool North to Tebay, and then split at Tebay with sections going over to South Shields and to Darlington. A nice Darlington section signal cabin on the right. And when I got this negative, I looked, I thought, oh, there's a scratch over the track there, look, on the right. And I was all set to try and Photoshop it. And then I looked at it closely. It's not a scratch, it's a toilet roll. I presume somebody's chucked it out the window, it's fallen out, but it is an unrolled, it's a roll of paper anyway, and I strongly suspect it's a toilet roll. Possibly from one of the excursions. Anyhow, we now come to my, I think, favourite photograph of the whole exhibition. This is the proud staff at Tebay Shed in front of their almost new 062 compound locomotive, number 351. And if you look at the rivet heads or the bolt heads above the buffer beam, you can see this, that there are two different cylinder sizes. It's a compound. The shed foreman, I presume, is the gentleman second from the left at ground level with collar and tie. The rest are obviously train crew. What I really like, though, is that on the right, that young man is so proud of his job and of his engine that he has brought his little child along to be in the photograph. Comment was made to me, well, it's a little girl, but it might not be. My late grandfather, who was probably about the same age, fell into the river at Knaresborough once and was only saved by the fact that he was wearing what I can only really describe as a little smock, sort of a dress. And so it may be a little boy, but anyway, it's he's brought his child along, and they are so proud of their engine and of their job. It's absolutely marvelous photo. It was colorized for us by Ian McCabe of the Gresley Society, and I think he did a very good job. And that's Tebay Engine Shed, which didn't last very long actually after this picture, because they reorganized the loco workings. Right, so we're at Tebay and we're going to head south now. I'm straying into foreign territory. This is the LNWR West Coast Main Line, and here we have a train of northeastern coke wagons on dilly car water troughs. Now, I know next to nothing about the London and North Western, but Richard Foster, who's one of the LNWR Society members and a good friend of mine, found out for me, first of all, this engine is what's called a 19-inch goods, so I presume that's the cylinder diameter, and it had been allocated to Barrow in about 1932, so that more or less dates the picture. And he's heading south along the main line with a train of coke that it's picked up at Tebay, and it's going down to this junction at a place called Hincaster, and at Hincaster Junction there is like a cord across to the Furness Railway at Arnside. This is Hincaster. The West Coast Main Line is on the left of the picture, and this train is it's a train of empties coming off the cord from the Barrow direction, and he's heading up to Tebay, and the fireman is leaning out with the train staff ready to drop it off to the signalman. And just look at that ballast along the cess there, not a stone out of place. Very, very nice. Of course, if you go there now, it looks absolutely nothing like it. So let's move on a little bit. We've now come down the cord, joined the Furness Railway at Arnside, crossed over Arnside Viaduct, and we're approaching Grange over Sands. And this is really quite a remarkable picture, because it's a northeastern loco on what we imagine is an excursion train that has come down the LNWR main line and across Arnside Viaduct, and is heading towards Grange over Sands. And they did run excursion trains this way, and it's all the more remarkable that somebody has actually photographed one. And so we're finally getting to our ultimate destination, which is a place called Lindle Ore Sidings. Now, this is where basically the coke trains terminated here and were split up for distribution to the various steel plants in the Barrow area by the Furness Railway. Now, I didn't know this, but one of the Cumbrian Railway Association guys told me that he said whenever they show the list of preserved Furness locomotives, there's Copperknob, which is well known, and there's another one, and apparently I can't remember exactly when, but at some stage in the early 20th century at Lindle, there was an engine standing on these sidings, and basically a hole opened up, the crew jumped off, and the engine fell in the hole. And it's thought to be subsidence due to iron ore mining. And they never got the engine out. It's still down there somewhere. So that's why they always say there are two Furness Railway locomotives still in existence. So that took us down to the Barrow and Furness area, and now a trip along the Eden Valley. So we're heading north now from Kirkby Stephen. We've crossed over the River Eden, and we're at a little place called Musgrave, or rather Musgrave for Brough, which I think is a bit optimistic, because Brough is all of 2.5 miles away and there's no public transport. But I guess when the alternative was to walk a considerable distance, then 2.5 mile walk probably wasn't all that bad. You can see a bridge there in the distance. I'm not sure whether many of you have heard of the debacle with the Department of Transport, who decided that this bridge, which was now under their care, was unsuitable to carry heavy loads, which was not the case. And so they spent a huge amount of public money filling it in and pumping concrete underneath it and all the rest of it, blocking the route, which was to be used either as a greenway or indeed for the Kirkby Stephen people to link up with the other preservation movement at Warcop. Anyhow, cut a long story short, it turned out they had no planning permission for this, and planning permission was retroactively refused, at which point the Department of Transport had to, at their cost, dig out all the concrete and clear it all away and restore it to its original condition. All of which was, of course, at public expense. So, and the bridge itself is perfectly sound. This idea that it was about to collapse was complete rubbish. All it needed was a little bit of pointing. So moving further north, next stop is a place called Warcop. And here's a shot of Warcop in the early years of the 20th century, with somebody sitting on the platform enjoying the afternoon sun. And again, this building is similar to the smaller ones along this line and on the Stainmore line, such as Bowes. I beg your pardon. Such as Bowes. Now, Warcop stayed open quite late as a branch from Appleby because there is a big army range at Warcop and training ground. And so there was quite a lot of military traffic, tanks, but also ammunition. But I think the tanks now are too big to take by train. And so that operation ceased. This is the last army freight train to Warcop in March 1989. And there are 4 vans, the one at the front and the one at the back are empty. They're like reach wagons, and the 2 in the middle, we never really found out what they had in them. We presumed it must be ammunition, because the army people, it was shunted into the dock on the right there, and you can see on the very far right there's an army lorry, and they loaded it all into their lorry and took it off to the training ground. Now, at Warcop at the moment, there is a preservation society, has the yard, and the track is intact as far as Appleby. And they are hoping progressively to reopen that towards Appleby. And of course, it would be really nice if they could reopen southwards towards Kirkby Stephen. But very unfortunately, apart from the bridge that was filled in and then opened up again, there's a river bridge missing over the River Eden, and that will be far more problematic. Okay, so moving further north, we come to Appleby. Appleby Station is more or less the same as Lartington, still standing in private ownership. In the foreground here, the chap who has it seems to run a sort of a scrap business, so it really looks rather scruffy, I'm afraid. This looks like double track, but it's actually not. That line in the sort of right foreground is part of the goods yard. Quite a centre. Of course, there is another station at Appleby on the Midland line, on the Settle and Carlisle, and that came quite a bit later, about full 15 years later than this one. And then going north from Appleby, the line goes under the Midland main line and comes to a place called Kirkby Thor. And there's a rather nice shot of Kirkby Thor. Again, that designer station building. Again, in the caption, I felt it necessary to explain to visitors that these are things called milk churns, and that they were used to carry milk to the dairies, and that's why they're waiting to be picked up on the platform by the train. And it makes you realize how big they were and how heavy they were. Of course, you could hardly carry them. You had to roll them. Kirkby Thor was demolished as part of the A66 road improvements, and I'm afraid there's absolutely none of it left now. There's nothing to see at all. Next stop, a place called Temple Sowerby, fairly small, not really very many facilities there. I think there was a very small goods yard. That's a shot of Temple Sowerby. You can see the bridges were built wide enough for double track, but it was always single. Once again, that design of station building. And then we move on to a place called Cliburn. And that's again the same design of station. A long way from the nearest village, so most of these stations closed very early on, although the main passenger service from Penrith to Darlington ran along here right until closure. So then we come up to the last station on the Eden Valley line, which is a place called Clifton Moor. And you can see in the background there, there's a 9F on a freight train. That's the LNWR West Coast Main Line. So we've already reached the more or less reached the West Coast Main Line. The rather posh building on the right is a waiting room for Lord Lowther, who had a castle nearby, which the walls of which still stand. They took the roof off in the 50s to avoid paying either inheritance tax or something. It's rather intriguing that the Kaiser came here. The Kaiser was a pal of Lord Lowther's, and they ran a special train from Sandringham up to Clifton here, and it ran as with one locomotive non-stop from York to Clifton. And the only reason they got away with that was because there were water troughs just north of Northallerton, and the engine took water en route. But I would imagine that when it arrived at Clifton, they were down to the last few bucketfuls in the tender. Anyway, they arrived on time, and His Imperial Majesty went off to the cheers of the local populace to Lowther Castle for a shooting weekend. And he then went on up to Rosyth to join his yacht, the Panther, but he went to Penrith to catch the train there. He didn't go back to Clifton Moor here. So finally, we come to the junction with the LNWR main line, not surprisingly called Eden Valley Junction. And this is a double-headed Saltburn to Penrith excursion coming off the Eden Valley in the 1950s. Two modern BR tank locomotives, which I think were about 3 years old at the time this was taken, and they only lasted another 8 until they were withdrawn and cut up. Now, this is an interesting and unusual shot that we think was taken by Derek Barry, and it's actually on the West Coast main line at a place called Yanwath, which we identified after a good deal of head scratching between the CRA members and ourselves. It's a double-headed coke train heading north, and he's heading over to Cumberland, and they think that this is one of the very last through coke workings to use the Eden Valley line and go over to Cumbria, because what it's about to do is use a curve that the Northeastern installs to avoid having to reverse at Penrith, called the Red Hills curve. And this is Red Hills Junction. We're now on the Cockermouth, Keswick Penrith Railway. And that line on the left, which is coming in, is actually northeastern. If you like, it's an island. It connected the LNWR main line at one end with the Cockermouth, Keswick Penrith at the other. but was measured with northeastern mileposts. In fact, just to between the two white signal posts, you can see a small white post at track level. That's the 1 milepost from Emont Junction. This curve closed in the 1930s, although they had used it a few times to turn those Great Northern 440s that we saw earlier, because apparently they would not fit on the turntable at Penrith. So they used the triangle of lines at Red Hills. But then one of them derailed on the triangle, and so that was the end of that. And it was about the same time that the Great Northern engines went back home south. This is a really rather splendid picture of a Darlington train leaving Penrith, with a northeastern engine, taken in the late 1950s. Again, a scene that is more or less unrecognizable today. The lines to the far left are the line to Keswick, the lines from Penrith, the Cockermouth, Keswick and Penrith. And this train is on the West Coast Main Line. Here's a shot at Penrith Station, with three locomotives. The one on the right appears to be heading a Darlington train. One of the other two is on the Workington portion of the Lakes Express, and the one on the far left, I think it's the one on the far left, is a local train going out to Cockermouth. So we moved along the Cockermouth and Keswick and Penrith. I don't have too many photographs along this section because we don't have too many pictures of northeastern trains along there. Luckily, we have this one, which is an old view at Keswick of a Stockton and Darlington design long boiler locomotive on an eastbound empty train, probably taking water. It's a rebuilt Stockton and Darlington engine. And then the new at Keswick, here's a DMU in the platform with the postman either unloading or loading mail sacks. And it wasn't long, I'm afraid, after this picture was taken that all the signalling and everything was withdrawn, and basically Penrith to Keswick was just a long siding with one train working. And of course it closed not too long after that. This platform awning is still there and is part of the hotel that's next to the station. Another shot very close to Cockermouth now, really another remarkable one. Here we have a Stockton and Darlington design northeastern loco on a loaded coke train at a place called Embleton, and he's exchanging single line tokens. And again, this is quite remarkable that somebody has taken this picture. It must be around the turn of the century. And another one colorized for us by Ian Mackay, and quite an interesting shot. And so finally, we're arriving in Cockermouth, and it was in Cockermouth where that's the passenger station. It was in Cockermouth where the northeastern trains and locomotives, like we've just seen there, terminated. And what they would do is the line in the center of the picture there that's curving round into the distance is the line from the passenger station, and the sidings to the far right of that are actually called the Stockton sidings, and they were used for loaded coke trains to be sorted and transferred by the LNWR to the various steel plants in Cumbria. So this was Journey's End for the Stockton and Darlington. I'll just back up one, because there was talk of providing an engine shed here at Cockermouth for the northeastern engines, but it was never done. And what they used to do was they would take water, and behind the starting signal at the end of the platform there was also a turntable. So the locomotives could be turned and watered there, but they couldn't get coal, and to get that they would work light engine back over to Kirkby Stephen. So that takes us out. It's high time that I stopped yammering on and asked you if you had any questions.